Welcome to a special edition of ACF Chefs Forum. Now, more than ever, it's important for culinarians to connect, to share, and to offer inspiration and mentorship, which is exactly why we're excited to have experts here with information just for you, the leaders and future leaders of the food service industry. We'd like to thank James Beard Foundation for collaborating with us today as we share this great educational opportunity, and of course, for JBF's ongoing support of the restaurant industry, especially during this challenging time. During this presentation, focusing on the state of the industry and path forward, we'll be taking questions during the webinar as we are able. Please be sure to use the chat function to collaborate with other chefs and also to pose your questions to today's featured guests. So let's get the conversation going on the chat. Please let us know where you're tuning in from today. I'm Jackie Pressinger, American Culinary Federation's Director of Strategic Partnerships. And at this time, I'm delighted to pass the presentation over to Megan Storms, Program Manager at JBF, to kick off today's discussion. Thank you for joining us today, Megan.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and a huge thank you to ACF for partnering and hosting this webinar with us. I'm going to quickly share my screen just to get us started. Can everyone see that? Okay. Sorry, I'm just making sure this is in the right view. Okay, there we go. Awesome. So thank you again, Jackie. So this past September, the James Beard Foundation conducted a food and beverage industry benchmark study to better understand career paths of food service industry employers and employees in the US, and to identify the challenges they face in order to determine what the future of the industry looks like, as well as the needs of operators and employees. Researcher Chandan Sharma will kick off this session by presenting some of the high-level findings from this study, and then we will have a panel led by VP of Programs Anne McBride to discuss these findings. So I will now just do a quick intro of Chandan and then send it over to him. So Chandan Sharma is currently completing his Master's of Management in Hospitality from Cornell's Nolan School of Hotel Administration. While completing his master's degree, Chandan has consulted for independent restaurants in New York City and Philadelphia, and plans to continue working with and advocating for like-minded operators upon graduation. So Chandan, I will kick it over to you.
Thank you so much, Megan. I really appreciate it. And good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And, just before diving in, I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank the James Beard Foundation and ACF for organizing this important conversation. And this conversation and many others like it are crucially important for us as an industry to both collectively, address, the myriad challenges facing our industry, but also come up with a sustainable, diverse and equitable business and a path forward. And I think this survey administered by James Beard is just a key element to addressing these issues, because while we've had countless empirical data points over the years of the problems facing our industry, largely been exacerbated by the pandemic. A lot of this data, really confirms a lot of those intuitions, but also some of it challenges them and allows us to have a more nuanced and deeper understanding of the best ways forward. So, just before getting into our takeaways, I just wanted to give a quick snapshot of the survey. The survey was 67 questions. It was disseminated, as Megan said, this fall. It ran for 40 days, and we received over 2,000 respondents. The respondents were relatively split amongst genders. So we had 57% of the respondents identified as female, and 2/3 of the respondents identified as employees of a restaurant operation. And then the remaining third identified as an owner or an operator. And the reason we wanted to make this distinction was because we really wanted to better understand the challenges that are facing both employees and owner operators, and assess consistencies and also discrepancies at play while coming up with solutions and identifying challenges. And then lastly, geographically, all 50 states were represented in this data. with California, New York, and Massachusetts as being the highest area of respondents. So jumping into the data, so the two primary questions that we sought to address were, one, why are we seeing so many people leaving the industry, and two, what needs to be done as an industry to retain folks and also to attract people to the restaurant business. And so we wanted to just first jump to job status. And Megan, if you could just go to the next slide, it'd be great. So as of August 1st, we wanted to just capture a snapshot of employment for respondents. And we just want to highlight here that about 50% of respondents said they were employed and they were full-time employed. 22% of respondents identified as being self-employed. And these numbers are largely correlate with the breakdown between the employees that identified for this survey and the owners and operators who responded. The only thing I want to highlight here is that over 80% of our respondents were either working, were self-employed, or were looking for work as of August 1st of 2021. So jumping into job satisfaction, which is a really interesting indicator, for really digging into, what is pushing people to either leave or stay. We really wanted to uncover and dig into that question a little more. So we asked respondents to identify on a scale from 1 to 5, a number of aspects of their job that that they could rate. And interestingly enough, while we've heard so much about wages as being the #1 issue within the industry, interestingly, the least satisfying aspect of jobs for many individuals was the lack of training opportunities. And that's just a really interesting takeaway to show that folks are interested in their jobs, but they're just not receiving the level of mentorship, the level of opportunities, and these level of ways to grow within the industry. On the flip side, you also see that people are really engaged and they like the work that they do, and they actually like the communities that they work in. And so the restaurant business, much like many other industries around the world, this importance of culture and purpose is something that really rings true. And this is a really interesting finding that we found, is that while wages are certainly important, there are other factors at play, including career progression and upward mobility. So just touching on wages as we go to the next slide, we wanted to, we understand and know that the wages have been a problem, but we really wanted to put a finer point on it. And this chart clearly indicates that not only have we seen wage stagnation across the industry, but if you account for inflation over the last 16 plus years, wages have actually declined. And this is just a staggering figure, staggering chart to show that as we think about pathways forward, wages just have to be at the forefront of this conversation, because as you can see, whether you started last year or whether you started 16 years ago, the wage has not increased whatsoever, and it's frankly declined, which is a serious point of concern for the industry. And then lastly, on the quantitative side, we wanted to better understand what folks' intentions are for moving forward. And while 50% of our respondents who are working full-time have said that they plan to stay in the industry within the short term, that number staggeringly declines as you go out over the next 10 years to just 17.3%. The other point that I want to highlight here within this data is if you look at the folks who are planning to retire, that number is a very interesting one to dig into. As you can see here, that 27.6% of respondents by 2031 are planning to retire, which tells us that both the industry is aging, and that a lot of folks are planning to retire within the next 10 years, but also that there really needs to be a legacy plan for hiring and attracting new and younger talent to this industry. So jumping to the next slide, and this is, we in addition to our quantitative data that we wanted to collect, we wanted to get some free-form responses and some qualitative data as well. And so we asked our respondents to identify the major challenges and roadblocks that they see facing the industry. And overwhelmingly, one consistent theme that we've seen across the board is that individuals are just not feeling respected. And they're not feeling respected by customers, they're not feeling respected by managers, they're not feeling respected by their coworkers. And this seems like a very kind of basic basic kind of roadblock, but what we're seeing is that this is really the foundation for what is causing a lot of the issues within the business. So externally, we see a lack of acknowledgement of the work that's required to create these meaningful hospitality experiences, which is then creating an expectations gap and some resentment, frankly, between restaurants and their customers. And then internally, we see this disrespect manifest itself in low wages and in inflexible schedules, poor work environments, and then no investment into the future of employees. So how do we address this? We asked our respondents to come up with ideas. If you want to go to the next slide. Oh, perfect. And one of the key indicators and takeaways is work-life balance. So, what we're uncovering throughout this qualitative data is one that employees, frankly, are not willing to work these very strenuous 10 to 15 hour work shifts on a day in, day out basis. And then number two, that employers must acknowledge, that employees have a life outside of the restaurants. And so, we're seeing also that the pandemic has really kind of forced us to reprioritize and think about, what actually matters. And this idea of work-life balance is something that is going to be crucially important in the discussion for the pathway forward. Number two is that employees and individuals while they would love to stay in the industry and are hoping to stay in the industry, there's just not a feasible way for them to find a pathway forward. And so, at a very basic level, as we saw from the dissatisfaction chart, they're looking for training and development opportunities in their current roles. They're looking for ways in which they can grow within their organization so that they're not, working as a line cook for 22 years. And then lastly, they're looking for, tangible monetary benefits that can really sustain a long-term career progression within the industry. And all of this just culminates into, a full reset or reimagining of the restaurant business as we know it. And two structural ways in which that we're seeing this has to do with one, scheduling and restaurant hours. As we talk about, moving forward, there's certainly going to have to be a discussion of flexible scheduling, rethinking how restaurants are staffed and schedules, how to incorporate, paid time off, and how to handle holiday schedules as well. The other thing too, from a staffing standpoint, is restaurants are going to have to reconsider hours of operation as well. As a result of the pandemic, we've seen many restaurants condense their hours, the days that they're working, and that's going to have to be a part of the conversation. Secondly, there's going to have to be a discussion of how employees are paid, and that includes talking about the tipped employee and the tipped wage, addressing pay inequities between the front and the back of house. And then also, offering, time off and how to pay for that. And then lastly, we're seeing this re-education of the public that, as we move forward, in order to pay for a lot of these changes structurally that we're seeing, what respondents are saying is that there needs to be a re-education of the public on, frankly, what it costs to serve food. And so we see this as being, a simultaneous need for the restaurant industry to educate the customer base, educate folks on what it costs to actually put a plate of food on the table so that we can move together and also manage our expectations for what's valuable. So I hope that this gives everybody a quick snapshot of the research that we've done, some of our broad and overarching takeaways, and I hope that this can serve as a nice jumping off point for Anne to kick off the panel with our experts, and we can see what's going on the ground and better understand what's happening currently in the industry. Thank you very much for having me.
Chandan, thank you so much for this presentation, for giving us the key findings, and for analyzing all of the answers coming from the more than 2,000 people who participated in the survey. This is no small task, and you're doing it really beautifully. I hope that if there's one thing you retain from Chandan's presentation, is that training is the thing that would make the biggest difference in people's satisfaction with their current job. So, more than wage, training is what people are least satisfied about. That's something that you can easily resolve, probably starting tomorrow already. So I'm going to introduce our great panel as we take this data and turn it into 3D with the people who have experience on the ground with this. Our panelists are Lilly Jan, who's Dr. Lilly Jan, a lecturer of food and beverage at the School of Hotel Administration at Cornell University. She brings nearly 15 years of experience in hospitality and food service, having worked in restaurants, catering and events, retail and television production. And prior to joining Cornell, she was the director of culinary operations for Newberry College in Brookline, Massachusetts. Sofia Mendoza credits her interest in food to the Mexican delicacies her mother would whip up when Sofia was growing up. A graduate of Monroe College, Sofia first worked in various award-winning restaurants in New York before finding her true passion in hospitality. She went on to stints in human resources and guest relations at 11 Madison Park and the Dynex Group, and most recently started a position at Union Square Hospitality Group as an HR manager. And Sofia is one of our JBF fellows. Our third panelist is Daniella Senior, whose love of hospitality, food and hospitality began at the early age of 13 when she founded a successful catering business from her home in the Dominican Republic. A graduate of the Culinary Institute of America and a certified sommelier who has worked in some of the country's most acclaimed restaurants, Daniella is the founder and owner of acclaimed restaurants in Washington, D.C., including Colada Shop, which has 4 locations, Serenata and Zumo, a dual concept at La Cosecha Market, and as partner in Michelin-starred Bresca. So welcome, panelists. It's just such a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And I want to kick the first question to Daniella and Sofia. So you see these survey results. How does that mirror your own experience in the industry? And Daniella, I see you're off mute already. So why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think these results are fascinating, and they're just bringing to light, I think, what we see every day. I really see the need for training, as you pointed out, as something crucial within hospitality. I think that ultimately having that path forward, I see that's how employees see it. It's like, what's a path forward? And that requires new skills. They depend on us to provide them those tools and training to see the path. I think by creating that path, we'll retain them. So I think that's something that was great to see, that was more important than wage, because I think as business owners, we're trying to balance that what's, an ongoing battle of obviously making sure that we're paying our employees a fair wage, but also the rising cost of doing business. And how do we balance that? Also, something that I found very fascinating from the results is that I think it's crucial that we re-educate our consumers, our guests in the dining room, as to how much it actually costs to put food on the table, because the value and the respect component, it has to be given. And it's obviously something that we can work internally, but it's also something that has a huge factor externally. People want to be proud to say on what they work, so I work in hospitality. As an industry, should have as much respect as any other industry. And I think that's something that psychologically really affects people when they're kind of don't feel as proud to say that as having, let's call it more of a regular job. And I can speak to for myself, like when I first told my parents that I was going to go into hospitality, they freaked out. They were like, what are you doing? That's not really a real job. And I'm like, what? Wait a second. Like, that's really, and I think that's a very old school mentality. I think that's something that, again, by providing training and changing really how people perceive this industry, will have a huge impact on how we are able to retain people within this beautiful industry.
Right. And this notion of job versus career is something that we talk a lot about at the James Beard Foundation, right? The fact that these are not just hospitality jobs, but hospitality careers that you can have. Sofia, what is your own experience around this data, these results?
Yeah. So, these results are not really surprising to me. I kind of have been in those shoes. After the pandemic hit and I got laid off for about a year, I decided to take a few months to really dive in and ask the hard questions to the companies of where, I wanted to work. So I definitely have been in the shoes of, people working hourly jobs. And now that I get to be in the HR department, it's really interesting to see these results, and as a company, really, really look into our practices and say, okay, people, pursue this as a career. It's not a side job anymore. How can we do the work-life balance, as well as making sure that we identify and correct the wage differences between the front of house and back of house.
Mm-hmm. And Lilly, as a researcher and educator, what is your bigger contextualization of all of this? So some of these results are not surprising. It's putting data behind what we all know anecdotally, right? What we've experienced, what we talk about. But was there something that did surprise you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just the confirmation of certain stories, right? But I think the biggest thing is, when we look at the data, it's pretty clear that a lot of the younger generations are just not interested in participating. They're coming out of school with a ton of debt. They're coming out of school with a bunch of responsibilities, and then they don't see the hospitality industry as a very sustainable or financially viable option for them. So I guess it wasn't so much surprising as confirming, but it was also very sad to see. I think for me, when we were looking at the data, the first thing that really stood out to me is the lack of progression, if not the downward slide of starting wages in the industry. The chart doesn't account for inflation, which is even sadder if you think about it. But we are paying people less right out of the gate now than we did 16 years ago. And that's just not acceptable. I mean, obviously prices have gone up and things like that. So it's been really challenging. And I have students, I have mid-year graduates coming through my office these last few weeks, negotiating their grades. But, as they kind of look at their career opportunities moving out of the hotel school, a lot of them are not necessarily seeing operations and food service as a viable career option. They're saying, I've got tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt, and I can't go into food even if I want to. And a lot of them say, I would love to, but I can't afford it. And so we're not only going to see a shift away from staying in the industry, but we're not legacy planning at all. Our labor issues are going to continue until we figure out a way to make this a much more appealing industry to not just join, but stay in long term.
And so, Sofia, you work in HR. This is what you do day in, day out, right? How do you attract people to work for you? And then what do you do for them once they've started working with you?
Yeah, so I think the practices that I knew before COVID completely changed. I think the pandemic did, one of the positive things that came out of this pandemic is really analyzing what is it that people want out of a job. So, one of my things that I do in my position at the company is really analyze the people's benefits. How can we take care of our employees? And one of the initiatives that we started after the pandemic is we stopped charging people for family meal. $3 per shift might not be a lot to some people, but to some people it is. So one of the things that we identified as being a restaurant group is saying we have this abundance of food, we feed people for a living, so let's feed our employees. So just kind of analyzing what the best ways are to take care of them, whether it is through benefits, through employee perks, through trainings, or through different opportunities.
What about you, Daniella? What do you do to make a difference of making sure people want to work for you and not all of the other great restaurateurs in DC they could be working for?
I think we actually have provided a lot of career path. That's something that from the very beginning, if you look, there are 4 restaurants. The general or the managers at each location have started from being a barista. So I think everyone around them does see that career path, and that's inspiring to them. By providing trainings and tools and being able to, I think, stay to our word and really promoting from within, and people seeing how you can start from doing coffee or being in the kitchen and actually progress into management positions. So I think that has really helped within our culture, people wanting to stay. So we try to really promote from within as a culture. Also, I think supporting minorities has also been something that culturally has helped us a lot. I feel like people really can stand behind that, and they see that we're making a big effort to hire within this community and keep them so they feel safe. So I think that has also been something that has helped us. We are a smaller business, so we are still not able, unfortunately, to offer, for example, all the benefits to all of our employees, but that is something that we are working on. But I can also speak at one of our locations, which is a partnership location with a much larger company. At that location, we offer all the benefits, and we haven't actually seen any improvement in hiring. It's actually the one that has had the most conflict within hiring, which is I found very interesting, because we go from the other locations not being able to do the full they have full benefits from day one, 401ks, 2-week vacation, you basically name it, huge discounts. And that location has been the one that's actually been having more trouble hiring. And that has been really an eye-opener for me, because I always felt that the benefits were something that potentially were holding us back. And I think that the culture ultimately is more important than the benefits and people seeing what you have to offer. So I think that is something to consider, because again, as a small business, I always felt, well, I really want to offer these things and I just can't currently figure out the numbers to be able to do it for everyone. And in the scenario that we are in that particular location where we can, we're not really seeing that we're able to attract more people than at the locations that we can. So I think it goes back to understanding really what people want out of working at these jobs. And I think that the clear path for a career has been something that has stood out.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if the lack of interest in benefits is because so many of these jobs are considered short-term career. And we saw in the quotes that Chandan presented, retirement and all of that is seen as something that is impossible or so challenging. And perhaps it's because you don't think when you're 22 at your first cooking job that a 401k is something valuable, or these things long-term that could carry you 40 years in the core of this industry, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Lots of education to do there. Lilly, I would love for you to talk about respect and compassion, because when we're prepping for this panel, that was something that really stood out for you. And as something, it seems so basic as a human right and a human need, but that would make such a big difference for people. Why is that not there? And then how can you express respect and compassion for your staff?
I mean, I think a lot of it, when you look at the research around HR and things like that, money is a short-term motivator. What's a much bigger motivator is a sense of investment in an industry or in a business or a company. And I think a lot of research has suggested over the years, particularly when you look at millennials, of which I am one, and younger, they really want to have an investment in the mission statement of who they work for. And so I think that, that's so important for a lot of people. So signing on to a business that invests back in them and they feel an investment with is really important. But for an industry that's focused on compassion and hospitality and being of service to one another, it's remarkable in the written data how many people just wanted basic respect. And it was actually kind of heartbreaking to read some of these entries. They just want to feel respected by customers, by their managers, by their employers, whatever it was. They just wanted to feel like they were seen and that they were respected. And it's just so strange to me that of an industry that it literally gives people positive experiences for a living, we can't internalize that conversation and do that for ourselves. And so I think one of the things that we really need to work on is this kind of culture of self-respect, and I know that this is an ongoing conversation, but I wonder if, this conversation about how we treat our essential workers in this country needs to be broader, right? Because we've told people that they are essential workers and that they are necessary for societal functioning. But we've also told them that financially they're worth the literal minimum. And that's just not something that makes sense. Like those two value statements don't conclude. And, as I think the president has said, tell me where you spend your money and I'll tell you where your values are. And I think that that's super important. Something that I've noticed within the hospitality field teaching here is that, other fields, other industries see the soft skill values of what we teach, right? Being engaging, having those people skills and all of those things. But at the same time, like the hospitality industry seems to take it for granted. Whereas other industries where they see that value, like in the finance world or in real estate, where relationships still matter, they're putting a premium on those and they're paying students in the hospitality field top dollar from the start. So why aren't we valuing our own future in that way? And why aren't we valuing those connections and those relationships? That's what I find so interesting about the data. And that's why we need to create this culture and turn it inwards a bit more.
Sofia, are those soft skills something that feature in the culture that you're creating as an HR manager?
Sorry, I was on mute there. Yes, they do. They do really play a big role when we look for candidates. That's one of the things that we look for, a sense of being respectful and translating it into the kitchens and in the dining rooms as well as in the offices.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of so it's great if people come in but how do you also foster them as something that you can train people on? Do you have training programs around respect and compassion, for example, or do you talk about that?
We do. So one of the things that we train our leaders on is that there is no yelling in the kitchen. There is no cursing in the kitchen. You treat people with respect. And if someone is not feeling well, they are entitled to take their time off. And just kind of acknowledging that, you know, workers are not just workers anymore. They are, in essence, who make the restaurant very successful. And one of the other trainings that we do is, you know, diversity, equity, and belonging, as well as other trainings to stand up for people, you know, after the, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, or, you know, the anti-Asian, you know, the hate crimes that were going on earlier. We train on people on how to navigate those situations.
Great, that's really essential, and that makes a difference, not just for your employees, but for them as human beings also, in making a better society as a result. Megan, there's a lot of thoughts and questions in the chat. I'm not able to keep up with everything, so if you can feed me any questions that come in, and if any of you want to ask questions, please put them there. Daniella, I'd love to go back to something that you said in your first response around the costs for business owners, because I'm sure you're not the only one who thinks through this and be like, this is all well and good. It'd be awesome to be able to give everyone 3 days off or all those things. But what does that mean for you on the ground as someone who's actually looking at the books every day?
So, you know, I think it's ultimately something that's difficult to navigate, and it's very, I would say, personal to each business because, you know, hospitality has a lot of, you know, with different restaurants function in different ways. And, you know, I think fine dining in this case has slightly more flexibility than more casual restaurants. But one thing that we've done is implement service charge to be for us to be able to offer a little bit more benefits. I think that having a service charge has a little bit of a different impact than just raising prices. But I do think that both are necessary to account not only for supply chain issues that have, you know, increased our costs drastically, but also to, you know, be able to meet the demand of increased wages. That is what's happening today. To be able to attract top talent, we have to be able to pay people a fair, equitable wage. And that's what we want to do. However, I do think that there has to be a lot of emphasis in just ultimately educating guests. And I want to go back to this. I think it's inward, as Lilly was saying, but I think there's also a lot of outward respect that and people, just that education component of like, how much work does it take really to put that food in front of you and that plate. And a lot of people have this mentality of comparing the price of food. It was like, you know, an avocado toast. Well, I can buy an avocado at the supermarket, you know, for $1.15, and then a piece of bread. And it's like, why am I paying $12 for this? And, you know, it's like you're paying for a lot of things, right? But you're also, you know, if you want to go make it yourself, then go ahead. At the same time, you're paying for service, you're paying for a place to sit. And I think and I've seen some comments in the chat, I don't think it resonates as well when people are taking food to go, which has also been something that has obviously risen a lot in the last year and a half, 2 years, where they're not necessarily paying for the nice view and the nice chair, and they can't see that entire value. But people have a lot of value, and that's ultimately, you know, the highest cost that we have in a restaurant are people, and it should be even higher. But also, we need to be able to afford those things. So I think as an industry, it's going to be inevitable that our prices will go up to be able to, you know, create that fair environment that we want, pay people the wages that they deserve, but also be successful within our business. If we can't make the numbers work, then our businesses won't be successful, and they won't be here to support those people that, you know, make it great. And, you know, so it's a balancing act. But I'm very excited, honestly, about this post-pandemic time. I think it's one in the last 10 years. I think it's the best time in the industry, regardless of, you know, we've gone through a lot of hardships with the pandemic, but I do think that out of this, a lot of positives have come out, you know, starting with this conversation and spotlighting the things that need to change and the rebuilding. And I think we would make a huge mistake if we just go back when things settle down. I think rather than going back, we have to create a brand new. And that starts with, changing and completely our foundation to be able to offer our people a great incentives, flexible work weeks, but ultimately also have an industry that's financially viable. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting what you're saying about the fact that people don't see the value, they don't necessarily understand what they're paying for. And I had really thought that after the core of the pandemic, when we didn't have access to restaurants and we had to do everything ourselves, we'd gain greater appreciation for someone making our avocado toast for us or our cocktail or something like that. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
And what's interesting is that I believe, like, in the beginning of the pandemic, you saw this huge appreciation I felt from consumers, from people coming in and really being so grateful and valuing the neighborhood spots and supporting. But coming out of it, it actually has, to me, seems a little bit of the contrary. I think as time passed, and then when they came back and they weren't able to receive what they had in their memories as like what was prior, because most people haven't been able to provide exactly the same service or hours of operation or extended menu. So, menus have been reduced, hours of operation have been reduced. You're sometimes not able to maintain the same product. I can't even keep cups in stock, so it's like, you change how you're even serving things on a constant basis with this new world. So people really get extremely angry, and it's when they should really be very compassionate, because it's very challenging in that regard. So that's something. There was a shift in between the beginning to where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Before we take a couple of audience questions, Lilly, I'd love to have you go back a little bit on the wage question, because it hasn't changed, but then in the last, maybe even since September's, wages have gone way higher. Can you contextualize that a little bit and tell us what has happened in the last few months and where you might see that going?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, with what everyone is deeming the labor shortage, which I actually prefer calling it an expectation gap. Because it's what the employees are expecting and needing and demanding, and then what employers were willing to provide, right? So it's really a gap in expectations. Just like any functional relationship, you've got to find that compromise. But obviously a lot of companies are trying to increase wages now to a point that's more incentivizing. But as we've seen, salary is a small thing, and a big thing on a lot of people's lists is healthcare. After living through a pandemic where they were kind of needing to work through a pandemic without adequate healthcare and support, they need those additional benefits. So we saw large chains providing tuition incentives, Dunkin' Donuts and other ones like that. So there has been that increase, but I don't know that those companies are necessarily seeing greater return on those investments, right? Because I don't know that Dunkin' Donuts is necessarily seeing a huge increase in applicants. I think, it goes back to that idea of culture. We also see an increase in customers being, frankly, a bit abusive towards restaurant staff. And so I think this goes back to the kind of previous conversation where it's also, as Danielle said, it's also about the society and the consumer taking on some responsibility and saying, like, well, where do I fit in this puzzle, right? Yes, of course, we have a lot of industry things that we need to sort out internally, but it also needs to be supported and motivated by the consumer, because ultimately their dollars mean a lot. So they have to understand that actually out of every dollar you spend at a restaurant, there isn't some Scrooge McDuck in the back rolling around in piles of coins. It's, like the take home for a successful restaurant is still in a single digit percentage, right? And that guests need to appreciate that there is a social contract that when you come into a restaurant, yes, we're going to give you food and great service, but we also have to pay for the air conditioning. We also have to pay for the paint on the walls. We also have to pay for the fact that you don't see pests in the establishment and that there's paper towels in the bathroom and all of those things. So those are things that I think the general public has taken for granted. And we've definitely seen that, time and again. They push back when prices go up and they complain. But frankly, restaurant prices have remained relatively flat despite the increase in food prices over the last 2 decades. So I think it's time for the consumer to also wake up and realize that dining out is a privilege and it's a wonderful economic boost to the society, but it's a privilege and they need to be able to afford it and understand what it takes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course that doesn't help discussions around reducing inequality in the industry, obviously, but how do we create a more sustainable structure and more equitable structure is really key, in the sense that the people who can and should pay for more help the industry be more sustainable overall. I've been looking through the chat to see, it seems a lot of the questions or comments actually relate to breaking up the existing restaurant model, whether it is with takeout, whether it is with chefs cooking at home more for people. What are some of your thoughts on that, in terms of, is the restaurant as it currently exists something that will continue in the future, for either one of you who wants to take it?
I guess I'll jump in. I think, a lot of restaurants themselves are even thinking of ways to diversify sources of income, because I think it will change. And as Lily mentioned, I don't think that we've turned dining out as an everyday thing when it necessarily cannot be. And that has driven the costs down, or what people are willing to pay for dining out. And if you consider what people were doing 20 years ago, dining out was a special occasion. It was a weekend thing. It was, you're celebrating something. Not that I'm saying we want to go back to that. I don't think that's the intention, but I do think that potentially the frequency of everyday meals at for lunch and dinner, which it kind of turned into, and what that costs is not really adding up. So I think other sources like CPG, I know restaurants have been considering doing meals to go, like full meals, also doing like sending their chefs to people's homes for private events, or serving Michelin star dinners at people's homes. I think there you have to rethink how you do business and find other ways. And those things have complications on one end, but also less costs on another, because you have a lot of costs that you assume by having someone come in. From people would not believe me how much I pay for trash. It's like how much, it's like people don't think of those small things like pest control, trash pickup, water, just everything adds up, and it has a huge impact. So in a way, you trade one thing for the other, the same way they don't think about to-go packaging. To-go packaging, especially recently, has had a huge increase in cost. So you might not be going into the restaurant and using the facility, but the to-go packaging has a huge cost to the business. So I don't know. I don't necessarily have an answer, but I do think that diversifying and finding other avenues, it's something that's inevitable.
Mm-hmm. I'll plug in some work that we just finished with Deloitte, that we actually have a report at jamesbeard.org on our industry support page. And we have a webinar next week on the topic of business innovations that have come out of the pandemic, with margins to expect around, or that people have experience around those. So, and that touches on, thank you, Megan, for putting the link in there. That touches on what you're saying, as what are the costs and what are the surprises in those innovation models that people might not even be aware of. What should you consider? Rod is asking, and that was in what Chandan was showing also, in terms of a quote about 4-day work week and everything. So how an obstacle to recruiting in the industry is the fact that this is not a night and weekend type of job or career, right? In the best of condition, that still exists. So how do we navigate that in the future? And Sofia, I don't know if that's something that you guys are looking at in terms of the scheduling of your employees. How do you create more balance there?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something to look in the future. I think the state of the industry right now, where a lot of people are experiencing labor shortages, we as well are experiencing them, and hopefully in the near future we can regain some more talent. I think a lot of what happened and a lot of the stress that's going into the industry right now is because we lost a lot of people that worked in the restaurant industry, whether it was to other industries or just moving out of New York. So we're still pretty much looking into that.
And I don't know if it's you or another Sofia Mendoza in the chat. Did you put the question on legislation, or is it may have been someone who logged in with your link and got that. So someone is asking, someone who is not this Sofia Mendoza is asking about anything around legislation and how can the industry lend more weight around legislation to advocate for different taxation and overhead rates, et cetera, et cetera. So whoever wants to take it here. What can we do to change legislation?
I think it's supporting, other companies that have a platform like James Beard. I know, during their campaigns for Open for Good, it was about not necessarily having people that work in the restaurant industry donate to certain funds, but having the outside public and educating them and, supporting the organizations that have the platform to take this to, politics or that pretty much have a bigger voice in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was a question around wage, of course, and there's a lot of policy around that as well. And calling your legislatures, I mean, obviously there are things that we're doing on the JBF side, ACF, I'm sure also. The more we can work all together, the Independent Restaurant Coalition, ROAR in New York, there are a lot of groups that are activating around pushing and changing legislations. I'm sure, Daniella, there's examples in DC specifically also, just everywhere these movements are happening. And there's so much power in numbers. So the more we can collectively be in touch with our legislatures, the more we can make a difference, hopefully there. I'm going to pass it back to Jackie to take us home. I want to thank you all so much for sharing your knowledge, your experience with all of these big questions, your willingness to make a difference, the power, the energy, the desire to make the commitment to this industry that you are making to make a difference. Because I would imagine that Daniella, Sofia, and Lilly, if we were to ask you in 10 years, you still want to be in this industry, right? You're not part of the respondents who want to leave it. So thank you for all the work that you are doing there. And we look very much forward to continuing working with you. The results of the survey will be posted at jamesbeard.org in early 2022. And we look forward to continuing working with all of you on all of these efforts to make the industry more equitable and better for everyone. Jackie, thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you, Anne. What a wonderful conversation. I know we're just scratching the surface when it comes to this topic, so I'll certainly look forward to seeing more of the data from the survey. But a huge round of applause as we thank James Beard Foundation and all of today's fabulous panelists. We know how busy you are, and so really appreciate you taking the time to share such important insights about our industry with our community of culinary professionals. Thank you so much. Please be sure to check out jamesbeard.org for more information, and also be on the lookout for a post-webinar survey that you'll receive this week. There will be a survey that you'll need to complete in order to earn your 1 hour of ACF CEH. We hope that you'll also join us for our next webinar, which will be January 11th, focusing on mental wellness for culinarians. So be sure to save the date. And also, we hope to see you at ACF National Convention, July 25th to 28th. In Las Vegas. For more information, for culinary news, or to register for upcoming webinars, please check out our website, wearechefs.com. And on behalf of ACF's national office, thank you all for tuning in today. We look forward to seeing you really soon. Have a great